Thank you everybody for joining today. I am very excited to be here with Betsy Bin and the rest of the PSA team to talk a little bit about agricultural water for today's Educator's Call. So what we are calling today's Educator's Call is Subpart E, agricultural water, new proposed compliance dates, thinking about the update training, and identifying growers' needs. So what we have today for you is a pretty discussion-based hour that we're going to sort of embark on. And before I turn things over to Betsy, I have a couple of introductions for you. First, as usual, all participants are muted in this webinar. There will be time for questions and discussion throughout the meeting. So we establish a number of poll questions, and there will also be time for sort of open discussion. Please, as normal, feel free to use the chat box and to ask questions as well. And just a reminder, the session will be recorded and the presentation will be shared via the listserv and on our website after the call. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Elizabeth Bin to talk a little bit about our agenda for today.
Thanks, Donna. And thanks everyone for showing up. Today's focus is really going to be sharing some draft slides, supplemental slides that we've been talking about for a while in terms of Subpart E. But what those really are going to cover is the agricultural water requirements that are currently proposed. We don't know what's going to be in the final, nor do we know when the final is going to show up. But several people have asked for slides so that they can start talking to growers, since I think the overall feeling is that what we've seen in the proposed is likely to be what we see in the final rule. We're also going to talk about the new proposed compliant date document that was sent around a few weeks ago. That is open for comment, so we're going to talk about that. And during this whole thing, we're going to ask for comments from you. And I think once we get into the slides, you'll have a feeling for really what we're interested in, because we want to know if the slides we've created work and if they're helping, or if there's something you think we missed that we should cover. So that's really where we're going to focus our time. We are going to go ahead and share things we've done related to Subpart E already for both trainers and growers, talk about some of the outcomes there, and then our plans for where we're going as the PSA forward, and where we're hoping you're going to go with us. So there's going to be a question about whether or not you're interested in doing some of the outreach that we think is going to be needed. So try and stay with us, because there are going to be poll questions and we are going to open it up for comments. So we're very interested in your opinions. I also want to thank Donna a ton, Mariana, a lot of other folks who spent time working on the slides to make sure we were sort of getting at the gist of what we wanted to. And it created a lot of discussion even amongst us about what we're doing. So again, really open it up to this discussion today, and I appreciate everyone being here. So Donna, can I have the next slide? This is really the first of the supplemental material slides, and this is really just to share with the growers what we're talking about, right? The title, when it was released, where you can find it online, what the proposed revisions sort of generally are looking like, moving from testing to this idea of a more holistic ag water assessment. And the key thing here is these slides sort of stick pretty heavily to the fact sheets that FDA has put out. We haven't interpreted a lot. There are some things like this next bullet here. The expectation is that growers set their standards and understand why those standards are safe. And then of course, if it's an inspection, the growers need to be prepared to explain that to an inspector. Why is my assessment valid or reasonable for my water sources? So that's sort of adding that little piece to it, but this is really just an introductory slide to the supplemental material. Next slide, Donna. Here you have what is the agricultural water assessment. Again, this is meant to give a very high level view of what growers are going to be required to evaluate the factors. You can see the ag water system, ag water practices, crop characteristics, environmental conditions, and other factors. In each of these subsets for ag water systems, the source and location of their source water and water distribution system, degree of protection from possible contamination, including other uses, animal impacts, adjacent land, ag water, looking at the type of application method, the time interval between the last direct application and harvest, crop characteristics, susceptibility to adhesion and internalization. This one gets a lot of chatter because there's not a whole lot of research on this area, but we'll talk about that later. Again, the point of these slides is to really just start summarizing for the growers what's being proposed. Environmental conditions, the frequency of rain or extreme weather that might impact ag water systems and might damage produce, air temperatures, sun and the UV exposure, and then other factors that could result in testing. Okay, so again, really a high level introductory slide. Next slide. This is where we start to try and, again, take some of that information and try and explain it. This one we added coloring. And I'm going to give Donna credit for starting this crazy train of adding colors, but I think it is a really good thing here. And I want to explain it to you because if you guys think it's a bad idea, that's important for us to know. So the first one is orange because if you look at it across, so your ag water is not safe and not of adequate sanitary quality, you need to immediately do something, right? Immediately discontinue use and then take those corrective measures before you use it at pre-harvest, right? So that's sort of like one stage in the game. When you move to the blue, now you're moving into things that require mitigation measures. Right? So you have one or more known or reasonably foreseeable hazard related to animal activity, biological soil amendments of animal origin, human waste, for which a mitigation is necessary. You have to do that no later than the same growing season. And then the other blue one is one or more known or reasonably foreseeable hazards not related to animal activity, right? So you got to implement mitigation measures as soon as practicable, no later than the following year, or you can test as part of the AWA. For those that think testing is gone, this is a great slide to talk about the fact that testing is not gone, right? And then the green is really that, okay, I don't have any known or reasonably foreseeable hazards for which mitigation is necessary. Okay, I'm going to inspect and maintain my water system regularly or at least once a year. So again, adding that color, and this color is going to continue as we move on to the next slide, where we now are trying to sort of encapsulate for the growers, okay, what are the corrective measures? What are my options for corrective measures? And what are my options for mitigation measures, right? So you can talk through these things with the growers, re-inspecting for corrective measures, re-inspecting the entire affected ag water system under your control, making necessary changes or treating that water, right, in accordance with the standards, mitigation measures, making necessary changes such as repairs, increasing that time interval, minimum 4 days between last direct and harvest, increasing the time interval from harvest to storage, other activities such as commercial washing, changing water application methods, treating water, taking alternative mitigation measures supported by scientific information. So again, really just trying to summarize what is in that fact sheet so the growers know what these things are. For those of you that have been teaching for a while, you will notice that what we are currently teaching in the curriculum as corrective measures, which are based on the, as you can see, purple here, thank you, Donna, for advancing that slide, in the 2015 final Subpart E, those are now kind of in the mitigation measures. We created a slide, and you'll see below, supplemental material, question mark. Within the team, we are trying to decide if we actually should include this. One of the pros to including this slide is that I think growers will, if they were taught by any of us, will recognize the term corrective measures because we kind of beat them over the head with that in module 5.1 and making a big difference like, oh, these aren't corrective actions, these are corrective measures, and these are how they're different. Well, now the corrective measures are called mitigation measures. And so I think it's valuable to maybe share that. I don't know how the rest of you feel about it though. So if you want to put a note in there, if you think this is a good slide to include, because we can easily include it in the supplemental material. We just were not sure whether or not it would be valuable or whether we want to even poke at it. The benefit, I think, of poking at it is that the growers will be familiar with some of these mitigation measures because we've already talked about them in the original training. So I'll pause here and see if anybody wants to say anything. I'll check the chat box. You know, if anybody wants to say anything about this or anything else. Okay, I see something in here from Robert. If a grower is trying to figure out their assessment, what do they need to have? Oh, go ahead.
I think Robert is asking, he asked in the chat box, if a grower, oops, oh no, now people are chatting. Okay, if a grower is trying to figure out their assessment, what do they need to do to know to make the first orange bullet that states cease using water right away? And that orange bullet, if I guess I can go back really quick, this is if ag water is not safe or not of adequate sanitary quality. That is terminology that we also saw in the 2015 final produce safety rule. And I like to call that the ick factor. So that was the safe and of adequate sanitary quality. They used to talk about the dead deer in the stream example. So I would have to look at the new rule and see if that type of factors changed or, but I think that's a great comment on things to put in maybe these supplemental slides or the final slides when the proposed rule comes out. So just some of that clarification there.
Yeah, and I think too, like if a grower has, interestingly, we'll talk about this later, but interestingly, when we did the focus groups with growers seemed to understand, like if you have something that you know is a risk, that you know is unsafe, that would trigger that, Robert. And there's any number of things that would trigger that, right? A sewage spill into your line, dead animals, you know, all of those things that we've talked about before. All right, going back to the chat box, I think most people like the slide. It's helpful, the new terminology. Somebody asked, why did it change? I have no idea. I have my opinions, but I have no idea why they did it that way. So Annalisa, so what for comparing when presenting them as similar but different? Mostly, if growers said so what, my so what would be, I just want you to know that they were called something different before and they're slightly different and here's how they're slightly different, right? And to me, that's just trying to get that linear movement of you've already been trained and here's things you might already know, so you don't have to relearn those things. That's what I think the so what is. Agua, Chana, you can call it whatever you want. Maybe you're suggesting I not say agricultural water assessment to keep this shorter. I'll take that into consideration. All right. Okay, good. Thanks for that input. After they do it, they are required to do a reassessment each year, and anytime there's a significant change. I know the word significant is not really a hard and fast thing, right? What is significant? But agricultural water systems, the ag water practices, crop characteristics, environmental conditions, other things likely to introduce a hazard, such as changing to a surface water source, or maybe a different delivery channel. So they need to do that. And these are some of the things that you could say would be significant. Again, significant is a tough word to quantify. They have to evaluate the impact of the changes and the new hazard. And importantly, they have to document in a record the written determination of whether a corrective or mitigation measure is needed for those changes, okay? And we're gonna move right on from this record to another record slide where they need to have a written record of the pre-harvest agua. We'll try it, agua, during initial assessment and reassessment, including a description of factors evaluated and written determination of whether corrective measure or mitigation measures were needed. Again, when they did the pre-harvest, but then if they're doing that reassessment, right? We just talked about that record. Growers testing pre-harvest ag water as part of their assessment have to have documentation related to the sampling and testing procedures. So we know a lot of growers are already testing. Some of them are testing for audits. Some of them are testing because they're trying to get prepared for what the rule is going to change. if they continue to do that, they need to document that. And supervisors must have a written pre-harvest ag water assessment and determinations. So again, those are part of those records that have to be in there. All right. Okay, next one. There are exemptions. Farms are exempt from conducting a pre-water agwa if the water meets certain harvest and post-harvest water criteria, right? So you're using post-harvest quality water to irrigate, so you don't have to do the pre-harvest agwa. You'll notice we put an asterisk in here, and this comes from discussions we had very early on when the proposed rule was released. It's not explicitly in the rule that that exemption has to be documented. But in conversations we've had with FDA personnel, they've left us feeling like that's going to be an expectation. That if you are exempt, you're going to somehow document why you think you're exempt. I leave that asterisk there because, like I said, it's not really clear in the proposed rule, but that's the sensation we have. So I want that on everybody's radar. And I think you should share that with growers too, that if they think they're really exempt, they may want to document why they think they're exempt. The other options are receiving water from a public water system or supply that meets established requirements and or is treated in accordance with standards outlined in the FSMA PSR. Okay. That's another supplemental material, so exemptions. Next. Okay. We're just gonna roll, right? We're not, keep going. Okay, so no, sorry, go back one. Sorry. So this next set is 3 slides, and we might be able to get rid of this slide right here, but I wanted to keep it in here to explain it to you. Everybody knows a few weeks ago, the FDA proposed compliance date extensions for pre-harvest ag water requirements. In this document, they are suggesting that they are going to make the compliance dates for harvest and post-harvest ag water come in prior to the compliance dates for pre-harvest ag water, because the compliance dates for harvest and post-harvest water would likely start before we all see the final Subpart E, we suspect, right? We don't actually know when the final's coming out, but I don't think anybody suspects it by January of next year at this juncture. So, and based on what things have been said publicly, I have no insider track. That's just based on what we've heard people say publicly. So this slide is here. And again, we may want to take this slide out, but this slide is here because I think it's important on one slide to say, 1, this document is out there. 2, they are talking about bringing in these 2 types of water compliance dates differently at different times, right? So that's the point of this slide. Moving to the next slide, we've created 2 slides that are in our typical format that we've seen in the PSA curriculum, where we talk about compliance dates. Here's a proposed pre-harvest agricultural water compliance dates. And this would be after the effective date of new Subpart E comes in. So all other businesses, which we sometimes call big businesses, right, would be 9 months after the effective date of the start of the new Subpart E. Small businesses would be 1 year, 9 months after the effective date, and very small businesses, that 25 to 250K, would be 2 years, 9 months after the effective date. The next slide is covering the compliance dates for the harvest and post-harvest water. And again, for those all other businesses, what we normally say are big businesses, greater than 500,000, would be January 26th of 2023. So January of next year, compliance would come into effect for these growers. January 26th of 2024, a 1 year delay for small businesses. And then January 26th, 2025 for very small businesses. Okay, so we were trying to decide if we should give you all 3 slides. I think there's reasons to do that, but if we wanted to, we could get rid of that first one because it does repeat this. to me, it's just important for people to recognize these two things are coming in at different dates. All right, next slide. Commenting on the proposed Subpart E. Very important if you are talking to growers at all and you're going to use slides at all talking about this, they have until the 19th of September to comment. And if you're working with growers, or even yourself, you have the ability to make the comment. So if you think this should be dealt with, you should put in a comment. I would say the note to trainers, only show this slide before September 19th to encourage growers to comment. After that, it's a useless slide and I just discard it. Okay, next one. So we're going to have a few poll questions. They're going to come up together. This first question is going to be, are these supplemental slides useful? And then the second one, is there anything missing? And so what we're asking is a yes, no. And then if you say there's anything missing, just put things in the chat box, or if you don't think they're helpful, let us know. Mostly we want to try and get these things wrapped up so people can use them. And again, with the supplemental slides, even if I know there's some chatter about using 3 or 2, we can always give you a slide. You don't have to use it if you don't like it. Yes, Don, we don't have guidance. That is missing. We're talking more about our slides. Unless you want us to add a slide that say guidance isn't out there, we could do that. Would that be helpful to talk about? I don't know if it would be helpful to talk about what is and is not out there. What do we know about what compliance looks like? Yes. Right, well, that's an interesting, we can talk offline or you can unmute, but it would be interesting to decide what that slide should look like. Amanda Perez, I really appreciate that. And if you have any ideas about how to get that happening, let us know, because we would love to work on that. Yeah, so put post-harvest water first, since it's likely to come in. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Excellent. Okay, I think most people have voted, so I'm gonna end the poll and share results. And,
okay, fantastic.
And Betsy, let me know when you want me to stop sharing and you can ask the other 2 questions on the screen.
Yeah, that's good. I'm actually looking at the chat box. I have no idea about what justification or documentation. True, we don't know. I will have we are going to talk about some of the stuff we're working on. Water testing for overall. Are they doing any? They choose not to use. Yeah, so people can use water testing as part of their just decision about their overall water quality. Lori, that is still an option, and I agree with you. I will continue to keep pushing water testing, because you don't know unless you test. And I think growers need to understand what is and is not the value of testing. Slides that growers are to see in training should have real examples and also be in single language and a lot less jargon. Okay, so Robert, are you saying you don't like the supplemental slides because they use the FDA words directly? I think at this juncture, I think that the team is really focused on presenting what is FDA thinking right now and not interpreting it. Because these really are based on the proposed rule. When the rule is finalized, we will definitely do a little bit more interpretation. But right now we're just trying to focus on what's proposed. Auditors are requiring water testing. Yep. So they're using testing in their assessment. Yeah, so Don, we're going to talk a little bit about some stuff we think we're going to do coming up in the near future that will get to this rephrasing that you have, which is what can growers do. So there is some stuff we have that we're planning to do, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. By discussing there's no guidance out yet, could be helpful. Okay, so maybe we need to add a slide about what resources we know are there now. That's a good point. And thanks, Rachel, for that. Stephanie. Yeah. Is it too soon to have a slide on how it grows? I don't think it's too soon. This is stuff we're working on right now. Stephanie, we're going to talk about this in a second. Yes, I agree, Amanda. You may not be using these slides until January, right? Until we see them in the fall. I agree with that. Do you need to bring up that treatment as mitigation still has no approved chemistries? That's actually very good. That's something we would probably put in the notes, Donna, you think? Just so that if they talk about that, that would be something you would present on. That's a good thing.
File that under other challenges, I think.
Right. Okay. Okay. So those are all really good suggestions, and we'll have to definitely copy down the chat so I don't forget.
Yep. And I will say we are saving the chat. So I think this is a really helpful discussion, but we are also certainly saving all of these notes, and we're going to be revisiting and incorporating.
Right. Right. And it's interesting, Priscilla, that you talk about this, what's adequate considering the old MWQP. This is something we talked about a lot when we put these slides together. And I don't think the MWQP is going to be a requirement for saying. I think they'll be able to justify it other ways. Yeah, Chana, we are talking about supplements on how to do an AGWA for sure. For sure. Yeah, yep. And the tool, I agree with you. We're talking about something a little different than the tool because we know some of the concerns with the tool. So great. Thank you guys for all those comments. Donna, that's all very good. So have you all read, here's another poll question. Have you all read the new compliance date document? We're going to ask a yes, no on this. How many of you read this new document? It came out a couple of weeks ago. Give you just a few minutes.
We'll give you all about 15 more seconds. Ooh. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share results.
Okay. Okay, so about 55 of you haven't. That's okay. So based on what I just told you about the compliance dates, what do you think about the current compliance dates? What are your thoughts on those? You can unmute or you can put in the chat. Way too soon. Okay, Shauna, way too soon. Both of them or just one of them?
And while Chana is typing, I just want to remind you, because this is a webinar, you should have the option, you can use the chat because a lot of this is open discussion. You should have the option to raise your hand and ask to be unmuted, and we can go through and allow you all to talk. So if you raise your hand, I can one by one allow you all to unmute and verbally answer.
Okay, unrealistic for production, no approved treatment mitigations available for pre-harvest. Egg water, way too soon. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I think you guys are sitting on the same page the PSA is sitting on. So here's, we sort of wondered what you guys might say to this. So our next question is, okay, if it's too soon, what's a reasonable amount of time? Because that's what they're going to ask when we're commenting. You know. Yeah, and I see Richard talking about, regardless of date, we're not going to hold growers accountable until our staff is ready. I agree, that's true, but I think we've got 50 states that are all going to do this slightly different. So I think the date is really, really important. I don't think we can discount there won't be people who show up. So the Subpart E proposed compliance dates, there's another poll question there, because several people have, what you're going to find out in a slide is that we too at PSA think it's not enough time, and we think there's some other complications, but then people ask, well, what is an amount of time?
I just shared results with everybody, Betsy.
Okay. Less than 1 year, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Okay. So 50% of the people think 5 years or 2 years is good. All right, it's kind of in the middle. Thinking 3 might be asking for too much. I think education needs before compliance dates. Agree with you. As you know, there aren't a lot of people out there to do the education, so there's that. Yep. Okay, so yep. Yeah, Jeff, you're going to have to go back. Well, maybe you can't, but we're going to have to actually go back to some of these growers. So we're going to move to the next slide just to give you guys an idea of what we're thinking from this aid. And our initial thoughts on the proposed compliance dates is that having 2 compliance dates for water will add complexity and confusion. Our bias here is that we need to retrain everyone, and many modules are likely to change. So training may not happen until after proposed implementation dates have passed. And we're going to show you a few slides coming up explaining to you why we think that is. I also think that even though it's been said that they don't think they're going to change the content of the harvest and post-harvest water sections, it's likely that provision numbers will change and maybe some other minor things will change. So I think bringing them in separately is not necessarily a very good idea. I think 9 months is too short, as many of you have said in this chat box already. Significant changes to expectations will require training, probably best done on farm, which is a whole nother step there. There's not enough trained people to help. One of the things we discovered, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, when we talked about the proposed rule, is it's confusing to a lot of people. As Richard just pointed out, we also got to get inspectors changed. Yeah, there's a lot going on there, and it's unlikely new PSA trainings will be ramped up in 9 months, because I am guessing, I have not been told this, but I am guessing any changes we make will have to be approved by FDA, and that's going to take some time. So Jeff is asking, will growers be required to come back for more training and another certificate? If not, we will not get most folks back. This is one that we're not sure if it's going to be required. The PSA for sure is going to keep track of it, and we're going to talk to you about that. Remember, you can comment until 9/19. So you really, if you haven't read it or haven't talked to growers about it, I really think you ought to. Next slide. Okay, Subpart E outreach and feedback trainer alignment. We hosted 6 Subpart E office hours, 4 in English, 2 in Spanish. This was really try to get everybody on the same page and understand what we were looking at. We discussed research that was available, its impact to the proposed rule. We talked about ag water assessments, science on microbial die-off and current research, water treatment, adjacent land uses. And mostly what I want to say is, if you didn't participate in any of these, really special thanks to our national colleagues. Laura's on the phone, Chana's on the phone, Don's on the phone. We had a ton of people help us with these office hours, and they were really good because of it. Michelle Danilick, Faith, all those folks who showed up and took their time. So we really appreciated everyone showing up and helping. Next slide. We also did some focus groups with growers, and the goal was to address the need for grower comment in the docket. And this was really expressed by FDA at IFP in 2021, that they didn't get a lot of comments the last time from growers. We held 4 regional and Spanish language grower focus groups, submitted the project through IRB to ensure an objective approach. We didn't want to put words in the grower's mouth, right? We wanted to know what they were thinking. We submitted the comments to FDA docket after participants reviewed the summaries, so they had a chance to look at them and edit them. Next slide. Some of the things that we came away with was a need for more detail and education about many parts of the proposed rule. So that alone, when we're talking about that timeline, that should really hit home for everybody. That need for more detail and education about many of the proposed rule parts. They even know it's complicated. Some farmers expressed that they're already doing water assessments and testing. So some of them were like, okay, I have a little bit of experience doing this. It was stated that the proposed rule would allow for more flexibility than the previous version. So they like that. Again, some growers think testing is out the door or not required. And I do think that requires a little bit of discussion. So here you see some quotes. The proposed rule puts a lot of responsibility back on the grower. While growers may not have access to the scientific information needed to understand their responsibility. These are direct quotes. And quote, it provides a good basis to determine what our true risks are and how we're going to assess those. And that this proposed rule would move towards more tailored response to the needs of the organization. So, you know, good and bad. It wasn't all bad, but it's definitely a lift, especially for growers that are using those surface water sources. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and look at the things. Calibration, I'm looking at some of the things. Teresa, larger farms are likely audited and doing testing. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And you can continue to do testing, but you still have to do that agricultural water assessment. Gretchen. No, I don't have thoughts on that, Gretchen. That's an interesting thing. So Gretchen is asking, sorry, Gretchen, I know you sent this to the host, but how do we address FDA's not accepting harvest and post-harvest comments on the most recent compliance date proposal? They're accepting comments for pre-harvest and limits the ability to sync the dates for pre and post up. And how do we deal with that? And I think that's a great question about how do we deal with that. I'm kind of hoping they'll bring them in at the same time if there's enough comments, but I don't know. I don't know. Enforcement discretion would be one thing they could do, but I do think it would just be simpler if they came in at the same time. Because then you got to get into the whole enforcement discretion if they go that direction, which is, I think, is confusing. All right, so plans for Subpart E outreach. This is the part of the presentation where we're going to tell you like what PSA thinks is on our plate moving forward and explain to you where our concerns come in with how much time we think this is going to take. So this is just sort of a big overview of where we think we're going. And I know there were some comments in the chat box about other materials that we plan to create and where we are with that. So I'll try and give you a timeline and an idea for that as well. So plans for Subpart E outreach curriculum updates. And again, I want to thank Donna and Davis, especially. I know we've kind of done this as a group, but I know you two have spent a little more time on this. We suspect, right? We don't know until the rule is final, but we suspect based on the proposed rule that we've seen that we are literally going to have to update most of the modules. The one module missing from here is 3. I would not bet my life that 3 is not going to have any changes. I suspect there will find something in the end where 3 needs to be updated. But module 1, compliance dates are going to have to be updated. Module 2, post-harvest water provisions that affect worker stuff, right? The provisions at least are going to change. You know, the water, hand washing water, bathroom facilities, all of that stuff. Module 4, adjacent land use and worker training. Module 5, 1, the entire module, that whole thing is going to change. Module 5.2, compliance dates, equivalent water testing methodology, supplemental slides maybe, water treatment, provision numbers. There's several things there that we anticipate could need changed. Module 6, post-harvest water provisions, if anything happens, at least, again, provision numbers. Module 7, documentation and record keeping, right? Because there's new records. And then possibly traceability. And I know this isn't related to Subpart E, but the traceability is floating around out there. And depending on when that were to show up, we may want to make those edits as well. And I suspect more depending on what we see. We were looking back, Donna and I were having a discussion the other day about when we got the final rule, how much changed from what we saw in the proposed. Remember that discussion, Donna? And the answer was things did change. words did change, things got moved around, terms got slightly altered. So it seems possible there will be other things that we don't yet know of. And then, of course, incorporating all of these updates into translations. And so I can already hear Rob Way crying on the other line. That's just going to be a lot of work, following up with people and how do we afford it, right? So then we're going to have to figure out how to fund it. But that's the first thing. So that's the first big thing we're going to do. Next, Donna. The other thing we're going to do is make sure the materials and resources are eliminate module 7. You can't eliminate module 7, Juan, unless you want to give me a reason why we should eliminate module 7, especially with all that record keeping. So required records will be one of the ones we have to update right away because there are new records that are in there, but it will be all the fact sheets and stuff that we have that apply to this. We're going to have to go through them all and make sure they're updated. Materials, this next one gets to what you all were talking about with helping growers figure out what needs to be done. And these 2 bullets, I think, are really gonna be a main focus of what we're doing coming up in the very near future. Prior to the final rule being released, we're going to start working on these. Materials to support implementation of an ag water assessment. And the thinking here is that if we start doing it and we get it mostly laid out in a good way, if the final rule comes and it's slightly modified, we'll be able to modify something that's already developed easier than waiting until it shows up. Right? So we can help growers get started in that direction. The other thing is the National GAPS program for years has had a database for years. We kind of haven't been spending much time on it, probably for the last, we talked with Michelle. Michelle, what were you saying? 2015 was the last time we were poking around in it, updating it. So that's 7 years. But this is maybe a great time to actually start using it again, pulling all of these sections into the database, letting growers know here's science that is applicable to this section. Here's science that would be helpful in making a decision about this section. It'd be great for trainers as well, and for extension educators working with farmers. So those are 2 big things that we are planning on doing in the very near future to get those rolling and get input on those. I see something from Amanda. Many states have cap fund reductions. Is FDA reevaluating with all this additional training demand? Yeah, as somebody who's constantly trying to keep the PSA funded, I don't know what they're going to do, but I hope they keep funding us. And other people, because as you're going to see coming up, there's no way we can do everything that needs done. We need our collaborators to have funding. We need people to be able to do funding. Dan, I'm curious about the line of thinking, Donna Trace, is it okay to just have an MWQP and annual inspection? If a grower doesn't want to do that, then they do an AWA. Okay, so my feeling, Dan, on reading the proposed rule is no. They can't just do that. They have to do an agricultural water assessment that encompasses all of those areas we talked about earlier. They can do an MWQP, but it can't be the sole thing they use to make the decision. So that's my take on that. I welcome comments or people unmuting. Well, like FDA should not be yes. I agree. Educators, inspectors, we all need to figure out what this means. And again, I'll say this, when Donna and I were putting these slides together, we had a lot of back and forth about like, is that exactly what it says? And you're going to see when we get the notes, trying to pull in all of those notes to be clear. So I agree, we're all in that boat. Okay, so Pam is saying that, Dan, she thought the MWQP was good enough. I do not think it is. I do not think you can get away from the AGWA. Here's a thought. Okay, so yeah, so clearly, if the chat box is doing anything for us, it's really highlighting the confusion about what is expected. And this gets back to that discussion of not having guidance. So I appreciate that. Next slide. The other thing we are planning to do, and this is a big question, you'll notice a poll question at the bottom. It seems likely that we should expect growers will need substantial help to learn how to do effective agricultural water assessments. An on-farm workshop would provide an opportunity to assess those risks, develop that working knowledge. We don't anticipate this would be required, right? I don't think this would be required, but it would require nationwide collaboration and training, i.e. if we developed a little workshop, an hour or 2 hour workshop that you could go to a farm and do with a group of farmers. Would you guys be interested in doing that? Would you be interested in attending a train the trainer, learning how to do it as a group, having one thing that we're focused on and doing that with growers? Is that something that would be of interest?
Betsy, I just launched the poll.
Thank you, Donna. And I'm seeing, I had to go back, I missed the comment from Chana. The database helps, but everything is specific, is location specific. I completely agree with you. There's going to be growers though that don't have their location anywhere, and they're going to be forced to make some extrapolation. I wish I wasn't saying that, but I don't see how else they're going to be able to do an ag water assessment if they don't have research that impacts their region or their commodity. Or their area. But I do look forward to, yeah. I agree with what you're saying, Chana, and I appreciate.
So to read Chana's message, because I don't think it was to everybody. Not sure how FDA has reacted to outside data as justification in the previous. So is it putting more onus on the grower? How has it gone? I think just adding that additional flavor, not just to saying, hey, there's data to support my practices.
Okay, so plans for Subpart E, as educators be interested to provide this type of workshop? Yes. The workshop is developed, would you be willing to attend the train to trainer? Yes. A few people said 3 other, I don't know, maybe they put it in the thing. It depends. Okay. Anybody want to share why it depends? I don't really know. So that's, you can share if you want. I don't want to call you out. In some states, regional previously, trained growers, especially on farm, will be significant. Oh my gosh, yeah, no, for sure, Renee. Florida, California, any other state with a lot of growers. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good point, Don. If you're working with a group where that's not really part of your outreach or not allowed. Yeah, Chana, so what case studies would be one way. The other way would be to make sure the farm you go to has all types of water and actually look at the water source while you're there and have people talk about it. I know you were part of the one, and I think it was your idea. I don't know whose idea the Polaroid cameras were, but that was a fantastic idea. Something like that. Yay, it is her. That was a fantastic idea. Right. So something like that, where we get them involved and we get them looking at stuff. And then I know I've heard you talk about where you put it up on the wall and then some people are like, no, that's really high risk. And somebody else is like, no, it's not, it's really low risk. But at some point we're going to have to help them think through that. And how do you defend it and make a decision? And I think that's the way it's going to be best done. I think that's our best chance, as you see the second to last bullet, to develop an AGWA that focuses on their biggest risks. That's my opinion. Next one. Okay, so these next two slides are just to tell you, like, PSA, what we're looking at. We have almost 3,500 trainers. We're going to develop these supplemental slides. When the final rule comes out, obviously we're going to change the curriculum, but we're going to have to host Train the Trainers. And we anticipate that trainers will be required to attend, or they won't be trainers, because we can't have people running around teaching old 5-1. That's just not going to be able to be workable. People are going to have to do that. And that's the way we're going to have to do. And then the next one.
I launched the poll.
Yes, thank you. Launched a poll. Would you prefer an in-person or remote update training? And this is really about trainers. In-person, remote, it depends. Again, when we talked about this internally, it all depends on when the rule hits and when we're ready to train people. If it were at a certain time of year where we're all together at other meetings anyway, in person might be really easy to tack on a 2-hour meeting where everybody's at. Otherwise, I think remote is going to give us a lot of opportunity here. In-person, remote, it depends, both. Okay, that's good. That's good to know there's a mix there. Thanks, Donna. Next slide. I'll be conscious of time here. Here's our growers, almost 80,000 PSA grower participants. We're going to host several update trainings for grower training participants in English and in Spanish, remote and in person. And surprise, surprise, all you trainers on the call, this is you, people. So once we get people trained, we'll expect all the PSA trainers to start reaching out to growers. And hopefully there will be funding to do it. Of course, we have no idea. Attendance may be required. I'm not sure if FDA is going to say it's required, if it'll come down like a 112.22c, or if they won't address it. I have no idea. Regardless of if it's required or not, PSA does plan to track it, and we do plan to create a certificate kind of thing to track it. Not a certificate you have to pay for. That's not what we're talking about, but just something the growers can have that numerically links up to our database. I think that's what we've been talking about, Donna, as a way to go around it, because we really think growers are going to need it to say, yeah, I've been trained, I know what I'm doing, and to make sure we're following them in the database. That's our plan. How it will play out, I don't know, but that's our plan. Next slide.
And I want to point out a question that Shanna asked. I think that was really good. Thinking about training, just the updated sections or the entire training, again, considering almost every module will need to be updated. And so
that's a great question, Chana. I think really what we're going to focus on is module 5. What will happen is this: if the changes in the other modules are simply like provision changes or language changes, we will probably present all the slides that have changed to the trainers, but I don't see the point in redoing Train the Trainer for all the modules. If there is something significant that has changed, then yes, we will spend more time on it, but I don't anticipate doing a full Train the Trainer again. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. So this is where I think we're just going to open it up to you. We're almost at the end, and I know we're a little short on time, but initial thoughts on our plans, anything that jumps out to you immediately, in addition, and thinking about your own plans and goals in terms of final Subpart E requirements. Do you think growers will need the work to additional help in educational materials? What are your biggest concerns? I'm kind of just opening this up with these last questions. Yeah, thanks, Donna, for adding that thing. Whenever we make an update to the curriculum, we always give a sheet that outlines everything that changes. But I do believe this will be an honest to God V2. So we probably will not allow people to train with earlier versions once this thing hits. Isn't it? Wait, hang on. Ooh, I missed you. Yeah, Zach, I always like food safety plans. I think they're the best use of a grower's time, but food safety plans aren't required. So yes, if they have a food safety plan, if they're doing harmonized, they've probably done some water assessment. Whether or not it meets all the components that we'll see FDA want, I don't know. I think when we are able to outline some examples, really be valuable. Yes, I agree with you. This issue of not good enough or they don't know, that's going to be a trouble. Yeah, and I think if the mushroom growers are using potable water, they are going to be eligible for an exemption. Jeff, that's my understanding.
And to clarify, that would be the exemption from developing
Pre-harvest, yes. Yes, sorry, Donna. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I don't mean exempted. Yeah, I agree, Chana. It'd be nice to see guidance. I just don't think we're gonna, I think if we wait for guidance, we're gonna just be so far behind. I don't think we can wait that long. Yeah. Case studies. Yeah, I hope our cooperative agreement money will continue to support us too. I think there's a lot of people out there on money they're hoping will keep coming. All right. Donna, I leave you 3 minutes.
I have, feel free, this is really fantastic conversation in the chat box, so feel free to continue. I just have 2 very quick update slides to present. These are more PSA heads up update slides. The first one is a reminder of the upcoming PSA update webinar. This is a webinar that we host every year in October. So this year it's going to be scheduled, the English version is scheduled for October 25th, 2022 from 2 to 3:30. We will record it and put out the PDF of our slides as well. And again, this is 90 minutes where we really walk through as trainers and educators start to prepare for the winter training season, to go through any updates since last year. I think it'll be a big one because of these proposed Subpart E updates, other resources, things like that. And this year we are looking at hosting this in Spanish as well. So the date for the Spanish update webinar will be November 30th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And we are working on setting up registration, so stay tuned for that. We'll be sending out through an email to all the trainers as well as through both the English and Spanish language educators listservs. The other little update I wanted to give is our next educators call is going to be on October 24th, and we're going to have Dr. Kristen Woods, Ms. Gretchen Wall, and Mr. Billy Mitchell talk a little bit about interactive training elements and incorporating those into produce safety trainings. So with that, I'm going to turn back to the chat box and see if there's anything else that came in to discuss.
Yeah, so there's been some discussion. I responded back. I think we all would love to have guidance and we all would love to have a clear understanding of expectations or examples. I do not disagree with that at all. I just don't think they're going to happen in the short term. And I think even when they do arrive, I think inspectors like growers are going to have different understandings, different priorities. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do, or we're going to be challenged to do, is to teach growers when you make this agricultural water assessment, you need to know why you did it. And you need to be able to, for lack of a better word, defend the decisions you made, either with science or with logic or, you know, with whatever else was a part of that decision making. Because it isn't clear cut. And I don't think there isn't going to be a magic number anymore, like with the water, right? So it's just going to be a different approach.
Absolutely.
And then the question, let's see, have create scenarios of what compliance would look like. Chana agreed, thank you. Do we have an opportunity to help shape guidance based on these initial trainings workshops as we plan? I don't know what FDA will take into input, what I will tell you this, Chana, is that as we go along as PSA, we would love to have input. And we will try to collect people who are interested and create sort of a committee to run some of this stuff by people as we move forward, because we really do want input, constructive input, and certainly the expertise influencing what we're doing. Jeff, we also need an appeal process for disagreements. I agree with that. That absolutely is going to have to be a setup.
Yeah.
Zone assessment supplemental, farmers need to understand what this is, not just numbers. Agreed. And I know there's lots of folks. I know Don's working on a project in Michigan. I know I'm working on a project with Chris Callahan and Don Schaffner. I think there's going to be other educational materials that come out about risk and how to look at risk. So I think there's some good stuff coming down, but I agree with you. There's going to be more. Oh, good. There you go, Donna. You could have just jumped in. Other thoughts? We're at 3:01. So I want to be respectful of people's time. I got to quit saying, is there, sorry, is there anything else?
I just want to jump in here. I received a couple of messages asking if this was recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. We are, as usual with the educators calls, we are going to clean up the recording and we will post it on our website as well. So that link will go out in my next emails. So you can look on the educators call website if you're looking for that. I also just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for everybody who provided input and tuned in. Hopefully this was remotely educational for you, but I know coming from PSA, we really, really appreciate all the input today as we're kind of trying to figure out all of these outreach plans. And I think a lot of the questions, even if we didn't have answers for them, were very valuable for us to ponder.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. And good turnout today. So really appreciate that. Really appreciate the PSA team that keeps thinking about these things and moving these things forward. And again, on team meeting today, we talked about our plans to move forward. And I think we're going to try and move forward sooner rather than later. So really appreciate the input from everyone and the effort of the entire team. So with that, thank you.